Hello, it is, March the 27th, ready for lesson 86 and A Course in Miracles Workbook for Student. Second try on this recording. I ran out of space and had to redo. I'm redoing it. Okay, and we are ready for lesson, like I said, 86, which is only God's plan for salvation will work. And holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. So let's look at God's plan for salvation, make sure we're not attacking it by holding a grievance towards anybody. We'll look at that here in a moment. But yesterday's, lesson 85, my grievances hide the light of the world in me. My salvation comes from me. Those lessons, we're only supposed to do one lesson a day. And at some point during the day, you need to start the new lessons. And so most of you are probably listening to this first thing in the morning, I hope. I mean, any time is fine. But if you listen to it first thing in the morning, then before you actually start your new lesson, you could take just a moment, if you didn't feel like you completely finished yesterday's lesson thoroughly, you could go ahead and have a little meditation before you listen to this video or before you do the next lesson. And then, but at some point, you're going to hand the baton off to the next relay day. Yeah, that's how I look at it. So we're going from lesson 85 to 86. I like to just bring our memory to 85 for a moment before we read lesson 86 and talk about any associated ideas that I'd like to bring your attention to. But my grievances hide the light of the world in me. Wow. When it says grievances show me what is not there and hide from me what I would see, what is there. And he says, well, because it does that, because it shows you what's not there and it doesn't show you what is there, what would you want to hold a grievance for? Okay? And then on the afternoon review, my salvation comes from me. Wow, he says, let's see, I will not look for my salvation or my happiness, my peace, my connection, my satisfaction, my joy. I won't look for it outside myself. It is not found outside and then brought in. But from within me, it will reach beyond, and everything I see will but reflect the light that shines in me and in itself. So, all right. And of course, we can say to something that's tempting us to be holding a grievance, we can say, let this not tempt me to look away from me for my salvation. Or I like the last one says, this has no power to remove salvation from me. This has no power to remove salvation from me. Don't think that it does. Don't give it any mind. Let it go. Keep your joy and your awareness of yourself. Okay, so before we move on to lesson 86, I want to show you these. Isn't that just some beautiful lettuce? I bought it from a local farmer to put out in my field. He didn't even know what variety it was. I mean, he could have found it. He had it written down, but I asked him, he didn't know right offhand. So it doesn't matter. I'm going to eat it anyway. My plan is to plant it in one of my beds that are just wide enough I can put my feet across them, straddle them, and probably about 5 foot wide. It's a pretty good stretch. And I'm going to run 2 rows of potatoes down as my plan, and then 3 rows of lettuce. And I'll maybe put some other cold weather plants like broccoli, maybe some cauliflower. All those things kind of ripen around June, and they're finished and you're ready to plant something warm, which I plan on making that bed be my 3 Sisters of the Iroquois bed, corn, beans, and squash. So I'm planning on doing that, except I probably won't put squash, probably put watermelon. I really like watermelon. And anyway, I'll grow some squash too, and some pole beans up the corn. Plant those a little later than the corn though, because they grow faster than the corn does. Give them about a week or 2 head start on the corn. Let's see, lesson 86. Still got our pepper out here. I just thought it was just such a beautiful plant. The jalapeno pepper with some little blooms. All right, let's go on to lesson 86 now. And I did want to mention that the reason that I talk about both lessons is because I'm trying to give you one more chance to go ahead before you pick up the new lesson. I encourage people, before you actually, if you do it, start the next day, for instance, you might feel like, I really didn't get a good meditation twice or once or whatever you were wanting to do, whatever the lesson called for. Right now it's 15 minutes once a day for the longer practice period. And you might have felt like, well, maybe I really wasn't as attentive as I could have been. I think I'm going to do that one again. And you could do it in the morning before you start your new lesson. We don't want to be doing one lesson and doing the other lesson at the same time. But if you're at some point, you have to say, okay, this is the last moment that I'm doing lesson 85, and now I'm ready for lesson 86. And I like to think of myself as kind of in the middle, kind of a cheerleader, giving you a little encouragement for what you did yesterday and bringing your attention to it one last time before we hand the baton off to our next day. All right, lesson 86. These ideas are for review today. Only God's plan for salvation will work. Only God's plan for salvation will work. Oh, I also wanted to mention to you, I know that I'm back on my plant here, but wouldn't that be cool to do a wall that was growing on? I stood it up and realized that wouldn't be that much difficulty, and it'd be really pretty. Probably could put it on the north side of a house, and it'd probably get all the light it needed and grow a good part of maybe you make a whole house that was just lettuces. Or sections of it would be more reasonable probably. Okay, I meant to say that and it slipped me, and now let's go ahead now. Lesson 86. Only God's plan for salvation will work, and holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. These ideas are for review today. Lesson 71. Only God's plan for salvation will work. It is senseless for me to search wildly about for salvation. I have seen it in many people and in many things, but when I reached for it, it was not there. I've seen it in many people and many things. New car, a house, what was going to bring you happiness, a relationship, some person. It could be a family member that you had intended them to be a certain way and they didn't meet up to your expectation or your desire for them, however good it was or bad it was. But you were trying to find happiness in all the wrong places. It's inside. That's what we learned yesterday. My salvation comes from me. Well, today he says only God's plan for salvation work. In that second sentence, I've seen it in many people and in many things, but when I reached for it, it was not there. I was mistaken about where it is. I was mistaken about what it is. I was mistaken about where it is. It's inside, remember? I was mistaken about what it is. It's our connection with God, with each other. It's our joy. I will undertake no more idle seeking. No more seeking what the ego wants, idle wishes, the middlemen with grievances. Only God's plan for salvation will work. Only God's plan is going to truly make you happy. I will rejoice because his plan can never fail. These are some suggested forms for applying this idea specifically. If you're tempted to hold a grievance, be upset about something, say to yourself, God's plan for salvation will save me from my perception of this. God's plan for salvation will save me from my perception of this. And then allow him to give you a new perception. This is no exception in God's plan for salvation. In other words, regardless of how much you feel like getting upset, just remind yourself this isn't even an exception to God's plan for salvation. His plan is still to be happy and to be joyful, to trust in him, to let what is be, to welcome truth exactly as it is, to be happy, to be at peace, to be connected. No grievances. Let me perceive this only in the light of God's plan for salvation. Okay, there's an appeal, an honest appeal. Let me perceive this only in the light of God's plan for salvation. And then lesson 72 review. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. So if you hold a grievance, remember, you're not just holding a grievance and attacking your brother or sister in your mind. You're also attacking God's plan. Holding grievances is an attempt to prove that God's plan for salvation will not work. Holding grievances is an attempt to prove that God's plan for salvation will not work. You're trying to prove that separation works. Yet only His plan will work. Only God's plan will work. By holding grievances, I am therefore excluding my only hope of salvation from my awareness. What? By holding grievances, I am therefore excluding my only hope of salvation from my awareness. Wow, that's doubly lost there. Not only have you're excluding yourself from the hope of salvation, but you're excluding it from your awareness even. If the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And Jesus said that back in the Bible. You know, if what you call truth is really not truth, you've got some real dark situation there. Better that you didn't know that it was truth, or that you were at least kind of questioning it. But when you believe something's true and it's not, well, then that's double darkness in a sense. That's what I call it. By holding grievances, I'm therefore excluding my only hope of salvation from my awareness. I would no longer defeat my own best interests in this insane way. How sweet he is. He's not calling us insane. He's just saying it's an insane way to, I would no longer defeat my own best interests in this insane way. What's this insane way? Holding grievances, which keeps me excluded from my only hope of salvation and keeps that from my awareness. I would accept God's plan for salvation and be happy. How do you know you've accepted God's plan for salvation? Because you're happy. All right? Ask yourself through the day, am I happy? Am I happy? Ask yourself over and over. On the moments you're not happy, that's when you need to be still and quiet and attentive and ask for help. That's one prayer that God always answers, and He answers it rapidly. He answers as soon as you're ready for it. Always. Specific applications of this idea when you're tempted to be holding a grievance. Here's some things might be in these forms. I'm choosing between misperception and salvation as I look on this. I'm choosing between misperception and salvation as I look on this. All you have to do is ask yourself if you're happy. If you're not happy, then say, okay, whatever I'm looking at. You can take a minute. You'll realize what you're thinking about, what you're where your grievance is, and then you'll say, okay, I'm choosing between a misperception and salvation as I look on this. Or you might say, if I see grounds for grievances in this, I will not see the grounds for my salvation. You can see one or the other. You can see the grounds for your salvation, or you can see the grounds for your grievances, but never see them both. Not at the same time. This calls for salvation, not attack. There's another way you could say it. This calls for salvation, not attack. So until tomorrow, let's do as we can our 15-minute quiet practice period. And then through the morning, say to yourself, only God's plan for salvation will work. And if you catch yourself forgetting for long periods of time, I carry mine in my pocket, even on the easy ones generally. My grievances hide the light of the world in me. It was yesterday, so I'll write this one out, carry it for the day. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. and only God's plan for salvation will work. So until tomorrow, be sure to stay happy.